Chapter 221. Zenith in front of them, the ground was shattered, creating a titanic fracture. The canyon was so deep and vast that Sonny had to strain his eyes to see the other side of it. Crimson coral clung to its walls, spilling over the edge like a torrent of blood. A long time ago, a graceful bridge of white stone connected the two sides of the canyon together. Now, however, it was broken, with only its base remaining in place. Looking at the bridge, Sonny realized that there must have been an ancient road somewhere beneath their feet. It led directly to the main gates of the ancient city, moving across the colossal canyon by means of the miraculous bridge and passing beneath the grandiose arch of white marble. Come to think of it, the headless knight, the ashen barrow, and the graceful woman whose hands had saved him twice were also situated in a straight line. Perhaps there was another road leading east, too. However, this thought disappeared from his head as quickly as it had appeared. All his attention was drawn to the remnants of the stone bridge, where stood another giant statue. Right above the weathered ruins stood a colossal stone warrior. He was clad in an archaic cuirass, with a beautiful spear resting on his shoulder. The warrior was facing south, as though greeting the travelers who traveled on the road to reach the ancient city. Of course, his head was missing. More than that, the whole statue was covered in vast sheets of dull gray spiderweb, as if dressed in a solemn burial shroud. Sonny shivered, afraid to imagine what kind of creature was capable of creating the thick metal cables of the web that encompassed the stone colossus. Noticing his expression, Effie smiled. "Scary, huh?" Sonny gave her a nod, hopping against all hope that they would not have to find out the answer to his question. For once, his hopes were not shattered to pieces. The vivacious huntress sighed. "I haven't seen it myself, but I heard stories of the creature that used to make its nest here. It was the mother of all these damnable spiders we've been dealing with for the past week. A huge menace of a nightmare creature, as big as a house and utterly deadly. Armored like a hover tank, too." Sonny gulped and cast a sideways look at Nephi's. "What's a hover tank?" Effie blinked a couple of times, then answered in an amused tone. "Oh, right. You're a school dropout, I almost forgot. You've seen a PTV before, right? PTV stands for a personal transport vehicle, as you know. I hope. Well, a tank is sort of like that, only much bigger and heavier, with thick armor and a kinetic or energy cannon installed on it. The government sometimes employs them to support Awaken when a gate opens near populated areas." Sonny tried to imagine such a vehicle, and hazily remembered seeing something like this on the news when he was a kid. Mostly, these tanks Effie had described were shown opened like tin cans, with their crews pulled out and eaten by attacking monsters. He shivered. Mundane people had no business fighting against nightmare creatures. To be completely honest, even Awakened had no business facing them. It's just that they had no other choice. "We're not going to try and kill that big spider, are we?" Effie laughed. "Actually, it's your lucky day. We won't be meeting the spider mommy. In fact, no one ever will. She's long dead." Sonny sighed with relief and glanced at the huntress. "Yeah, great, but how do you know?" She shrugged. "She was killed by the second ruler of the Bright Castle before he went and got himself killed trying to conquer the Crimson Spire. The huntress who showed me the ropes when I arrived on the Forgotten Shore had actually been one of the members of his cohort once, if you can believe it. In fact, she was the one who dealt the finishing blow to that abomination." Effie looked at the giant mass of spiderwebs and shook her head. "It must have been one hell of a battle, huh? Anyway, I'm glad that she did. That's how she received the Zenith Shard, which I then inherited." Sonny frowned. "What exactly are you talking about?" The huntress leaned on her beautiful bronze spear and patted its shaft. "My spear. It's a Tier 5 awakened memory, so the big bad spider was an awakened tyrant, I guess. Can you imagine? All these creepy crawlers serving a sentient commander. Thank gods it's dead. Sunny looked at her with a dubious expression. Why would that mentor of yours give away such a treasure? Effie was silent for a few moments, then smiled. Ah, we were kind of close. Plus, she had no idea how to use a spear. Sorcerers, am I right? In any case, she gave the Zenith shard to me. Despite her carefree tone, he could tell that that smile was fake. Effie did not let it show, but Sunny could tell that the death of this huntress whose name he didn't even know affected her more than she was telling. Who knows? Since Effie's original cohort had perished in the catacombs, their corpses might still be somewhere there in those cursed tunnels. However, something else was on his mind. Sunny furrowed his brow. Midnight Shard, Zenith Shard, was there a connection? He didn't know. There might have been. He had received the Midnight Shard from Nephi's, who had gotten it after killing the Carapace demon. The demon, even though it had been enthralled by the Soul Devourer, appeared as the leader of the nightmare creature in that region of the labyrinth, just like the brood mother of the iron spiders had been. Two headless statues, two powerful abominations, two memories with similar names. Wasn't it a little bit too much to be a coincidence? Glancing at Effie, he asked, "Was your spear forged from a shard of a fallen star, by chance?" Just as he said it, Cassie slightly turned her head, listening to their conversation. That small detail told Sunny everything he wanted to know. The huntress raised her eyebrows. "It was, at least according to its description. Who told you?" A corner of Sunny's lips slightly curled upward. "No one, I just guessed." With that, he left Effie alone and walked forward. It seemed as though he was right. There was some hidden meaning behind the names of these two memories. Cassie seemed to know something about it, and that meant that Nephi's did, too. And yet, they chose to keep it from Sunny and the rest of the cohort. He sighed. So this expedition is not as simple as it seems. Not that it ever seemed particularly simple to begin with. He had guessed a long time ago that Changing Star had some hidden motive to want to leave the Dark City, but now his suspicions were as good as confirmed. The smile disappeared from Sunny's face. He didn't like being kept in the dark at all. Kept in the dark, huh? Oh, the irony. At that moment, his shadow reached the base of the giant statue. With a deep frown, Sunny summoned the Midnight Shard and glanced at Nephi's, putting all needless thought aside. "There's a nest ahead. We will have to destroy it to access the statue. Lots of spiders, some bigger ones too." She gave him a nod and turned to face the others. "We need to clear the nest and climb the statue before the sun sets. Prepare for battle." A clear and melodic sound of a ringing bell reverberated through the air above the labyrinth, alerting the monstrous spiders hiding in the enormous cocoon of gray webs that a new prey came knocking on their door. Moments later, swift bodies clad in heavy plates of iron armor shot from beneath the gray spiderweb, moving through the steel wires with terrifying speed. There were enough nightmare creatures in that wave to obliterate anything that stood in their way, seemingly. However, what stood in their way were two figures, one tall and boisterous, the other one on the shorter side, and radiating a strange feeling of indifferent firmness. They were Effie and the Stone Saint. Both held their shields raised, the tips of their weapons resting on their edges. As the huntress grinned, the shadow silently struck the rim of her shield with the blade of her sword twice. As if answering that call, a vicious black arrow suddenly appeared from somewhere above, hitting the leading spider right in one of its many eyes. The monster's legs buckled, and it fell to the ground, forcing those creatures that followed behind to either dash around or jump over the massive body. A fraction of a second later, the wave of spiders crashed into the small shield wall. A deafening roar of iron striking against iron resounded under the gray skis of the forgotten shore like a thunderclap. Despite the furious force of the assault, Effie and the Stone Saint somehow held, at least for now. As soon as the momentum of the iron spiders was slowed down a little, Nephi's and Castor appeared out of nowhere and attacked the mass of repulsive creatures from the sides. At the same time, a stone-like sword and a beautiful bronze spear lashed out from behind the shields. Black blood splashed into the air. Meanwhile, Sunny softly landed on the ground behind the nightmare creatures and stealthily moved through the shadows, swiftly approaching them from the back. The midnight shard flashed, sending one of the spiders into the embrace of death. "You have slain an awakened beast." Without listening to the spell, Sunny used the precious moments before the enemy noticed his presence to wreak as much havoc as possible. His takai moved twice more, severing several limbs and heavily wounding another abomination. After that, the spiders finally reacted to his treacherous attack. Not treacherous, just smart. With Effie and the Stone Saint holding the front, Nephi's and Castor attacking from the sides, and Sunny closing the trap from behind, the monstrous arachnids were now surrounded from all sides. Well, sort of. Of course, a small group of dormant humans could never hope to truly surround this many superior nightmare creatures, not even with the help of a monster of their own. Trapped or not, as soon as the iron spiders had the time to react, they could easily overwhelm and tear them to pieces. Especially Sunny, who was behind the line of these vicious creatures and all alone. If the spiders decided to shift the focus of their attack, he would be dead in seconds. As another black arrow hit one of the larger spiders in the abdomen, Sunny hissed and dove under a spider scythe, then thrust his sword forward, ruthlessly piercing the head of the beast through its open, salivating mouth. "You have." With no time to tear the midnight shard from the spider's corpse, Sunny let go of its hilt and jumped back, narrowly avoiding being crushed by another ironclad creature. The few seconds of the advantage they had were coming to an end. A moment or two later, the spiders were bound to come to their senses. Even though the cohort had managed to kill 10 or so in this short window of time, there were still enough of the deadly creatures to rip them to shreds. Sunny didn't even have to look at Nephi's to feel the shift in her movements. The silent understanding the two of them developed during their journey through the labyrinth many months ago was still there, allowing them to cooperate perfectly without the need to use any words, as though they were two parts of the same whole. In fact, despite the rift in their relationship, this bond was stronger than ever. Perhaps because they understood each other so much better now, for better or for worse. It was so exhilarating to fight side by side with Changing Star once again. Just before the spiders were able to turn the tide of the battle in their favor, Effie and the Stone Saint, who was following Sunny's command, suddenly moved to the sides. Nephi's, Castor, and Sunny braced themselves. Behind the improvised shield wall stood Cassie. She was holding a wooden staff in her hands, while an elegant rapier hovered in the air above her shoulder. The tip of the rapier pointed directly at the spiders. As though following the direction of the quiet dancer's blade, Cassie moved her staff and activated its enchantment. Immediately, a powerful gust of hurricane wind slammed into the mass of the nightmare creatures, sending several of them reeling and throwing clouds of dust into the air. Of course, it wasn't strong enough to truly throw these abominations off their balance or damage them in any way. However, that wasn't the plan. Spider-kin of these creatures back on Earth had a uniquely powerful sense of hearing, which was rather strange, considering that they had no organs that resembled ears at all. The truth of the matter was that spiders were able to feel the vibrations of sound waves. They were also masterful architects, using the vibrations in the specially created threads weaved into their webs to sense the movements of their prey from afar. These nightmare creatures were much the same. As the powerful wind threw dust into the air and made every wire of every surrounding spiderweb vibrate all at once, they were momentarily disoriented. The members of the cohort were waiting for this exact moment. Instantly, They attacked with ferocious determination, spilling rivers of viscous black blood onto the ground. Sonny himself had already gotten his austere sword back, and now used its razor-sharp blade to gut the beast that had forced him to retreat a couple of seconds ago. "You have slain." By the time the iron spiders came back to their senses, their numbers were significantly diminished. But there were still so many of them. After that, the battlefield became consumed with chaos. There was no time for plans or tactics anymore. Every member of the cohort had to face off against multiple opponents, fighting with desperate resolve against enemies that surpassed them both in terms of personal power and numbers. Only the Stone Saint was calm and indifferent, moving through the ranks of the iron spiders like a graceful incarnation of pure darkness. The battle fell apart into several small pockets of fearsome violence. Kai was trying to support his companions from above, but with how intense the fighting got, he was having trouble finding the opportunities to take shots without risking hitting them. He was too afraid to take a risk, knowing all too well how harrowing the effects of the blood arrow were. If even the nightmare creatures of higher rank were doomed to succumb to a torturous death after being wounded by the ghastly memory, humans like them had no chance of surviving. For now, people on the ground were on their own. Sonny was struggling against two ironclad abominations, gritting his teeth in exasperation. The damn bastards were too fast to reliably hit them in the gaps in armor, and too damn powerful to face them directly. As the result, he was forced to constantly dance between the two of them, dodging the whirlwind of strikes that rained on him from all sides. Curses! Jumping back, he held the midnight shard with one hand and used another to throw the prowling thorn in the direction of one of the spiders. The creature easily dodged the kunai and continued its attack, threatening to slice Sonny's hand clean off. He had no choice but to retreat once again. Behind the menacing beast, the throwing dagger continued to spin. A few moments later, it cut a smooth arch in the air and flew back, as if turning into a boomerang. Sadly, just like the spiders back on Earth, these repulsive creatures had an almost absolute field of vision. The second spider simply moved its head down at the last moment without even bothering to turn it, dodging the heavy kunai that approached it from behind. But Sonny was never trying to wound the nightmare creatures with the prowling thorn to begin with. Instead, he wanted to let them taste their own medicine. A moment later, the invisible string of his kunai drew taut, wrapped around two massive bodies. Just like prey used to be caught in their webs, the iron spiders were now caught by the invisible string of the prowling thorn, tripping over it and crashing into each other. Sonny dashed forward and let the midnight shard sing. The graceful blade flashed twice, sending two ugly spider heads spinning into the air. "You have slain an awakened beast, Iron Spider. Your shadow grows stronger." Kicking one of the heads away, Sonny swiftly glanced around, searching for a new enemy. But there were none. "You have slain an awakened beast, Iron Spider. Your shadow grows stronger. You have received a memory." The gargantuan cocoon of steel spiderwebs was empty. Corpses of its previous inhabitants littered the ground, oozing with black blood. The cohort had cleared the entire nest full of awakened abominations. No matter how incredible, this was the undeniable truth. They had won. The danger was gone, so Sonny allowed himself to tiredly kneel on the ground, his breathing heavy and laborious. The strenuous battle against the host of spiders had not lasted long, but he was utterly exhausted. The intensity of these perilous minutes was enough to bring anyone down to their knees. "Too weak, I am still too weak." With a heavy sigh, he summoned the runes and glanced at the number of shadow fragments. Shadow fragments, 362/1000. Not bad. Clearing the nest had given him 22 fragments, 10 for the 5 iron spiders he had killed himself, and another 12 for those slain by the Shadow Saint. With the taciturn monster serving as his murderous pet, the speed with which Sonny was able to accumulate power was twice as fast, at least. If things continued like this, the Stone Saint was going to return his investment of 100 shadow fragments in no time. If I live long enough. With a grimace, Sonny dismissed the midnight shard and slowly got up. The sun was already rolling down toward the horizon, so they had to hurry with collecting soul shards from the corpses of the iron spiders. There were a lot of corpses. Cutting one of the beasts open with the prowling thorn, Sonny struggled with the idea that they had eviscerated this many nightmare creatures. Of course, he had expected this much. After all, Nephi's and Sonny had been able to fight against 2 or 3 carapace scavengers back when it was only the 2 of them. Both of them were much weaker, less experienced, and barely equipped with memories back then, too. Now that they had spent 7 whole months in the dream realm, many times more than most sleepers ever had to, and tempered themselves against the perilous hellscape of the Forgotten Shore, both their skill and level of power had dramatically increased. Add the fact that there were 2 other powerhouses fighting alongside them, as well as Nightingale and the menacing Stone Saint, and the outcome of the battle ceased to be that surprising. And yet, observing the carnage that they had left in their wake still made Sonny doubt his eyes. These were awakened nightmare creatures still. The real reason why the cohort had won did not lie in the individual prowess of its members, but in their ability to cooperate and control the battlefield. The iron spiders were powerful and deadly, but at the end of the day, they were still mindless beasts. That's why they had allowed themselves to be surrounded and trapped. Had they been commanded by a creature of a higher class, one that was as cunning and smart as the humans it faced, things would have turned out very differently. Sonny sighed. Come to think of it, the labyrinth was a curious place. It teemed with abominable creatures of all kinds, but almost all of them were of the mindless variety. The only 2 exceptions he knew about were the carapace demon and the spider matriarch, who had been either a devil or a tyrant. Perhaps it was just the nature of this place. Nothing too big and strong could escape from the flood of black water that drowned the world every night. Only comparatively small monsters were able to run away or hide, both from the dark sea itself and from the hungry terrors that inhabited it. These monsters were an almost insurmountable threat to those unfortunate young people who were sent to this forsaken hell by the spell. But by the standards of the Forgotten Shore itself, they were nothing but insects. A horde of parasites who fed on the crumbs left behind by the true masters of this place. What a depressing thought. This notion poured cold water on Sonny's pride over their achievement. Well, whatever. Soon, they were done with the gruesome job of fishing out the soul shards out of the dead spiders. While Nephi's was dividing the spoils among the members of the cohort, Sonny used the chance to dive into his soul sea and inspect the memory he had received during the battle. It turned out to be a cloak weaved from spider silk. Judging from the description, the cloak could provide him with a small amount of protection against physical attacks, simply by virtue of being very hard to pierce. Without thinking too much, Sonny fed the cloak to the Stone Saint. It was just a Tier 1 memory, so no amount of protection it could provide would be of any help in this damned place. He would also rather kill himself than go into a battle while wearing a cloak. There were easier and less painful ways to die. Plus, it was white. Didn't exactly go along with the dark gray fabric of the puppeteer's shard, not to mention being a hindrance to anything having to do with stealth. The Stone Saint absorbed another shadow fragment at least. Receiving his share of the soul shards and entrusting them to Effie, who had more than enough space in her enchanted bag, Sonny glanced at Nephi's. Changing Star was looking at the sun, calculating something in her head. After a few moments, she sighed and said, "We still have some time. Let's explore the nest before ascending the statue." Sonny grinned. As an amateur explorer, this was exactly what he wanted to hear. The nest was formed by endless wires of the strange metal web and resembled a vast sphere. It was built around one of the legs of the stone colossus, effectively blocking the path to the bridge. The entrance was situated high above the ground and extremely wide. Looking at the diameter of that hole gave Sonny an understanding of just how big the spider matriarch had been. He shivered. The second lord of the castle had been a very powerful individual. Sonny didn't even want to imagine what the battle with the giant arachnid must have looked like. Inside, it was dark and damp. Drops of black water were falling from above, creating an ominous melody. Peering into the darkness, Sonny suddenly stumbled and froze for a moment. This he didn't expect. Inside the giant nest of spiderwebs, a desiccated corpse of the colossal matriarch lay shriveled on the floor, its iron carapace shattered by some devastating blow. The creature was long dead, but the sight of it was still terrifying. The vast abdomen of the brood mother, however, appeared to have been severed much later than her fatal battle against the lord of the bright castle. It almost looked as if it was torn apart from within. Inside the terrifying wound, Sonny noticed the shattered remnants of 5 giant metallic eggs. The size of them was about the same as that of the 5 monstrous fallen beasts that had destroyed the original stone saint and her brethren back in the Dark City. So that was where they came from. Looking away with a shiver, Sonny noticed numerous cocoons of spiderwebs attached to the walls of the nest, all around the dead matriarch. Inside them, withered carcasses of nightmare creatures of all shapes and sizes were preserved in a strangely good condition. This was a true museum of terror. The nightmare creatures appeared as though they were kept alive inside the cocoons for a long, long time, before finally succumbing to death and turning into mummified corpses. Perhaps the abominable spiders stored them there for later consumption. Or not. Noticing a few cocoons that had been broken open and what was inside of them, Sonny had to try hard to stop himself from vomiting. The iron spiders did not use the monsters caught in the cocoons for food. They used them as incubators. The creatures in the broken cocoons had been devoured from within. A few of them still had hundreds of small, moist eggs embedded into their flesh, with embryonic spiderlings moving weakly behind the slightly transparent shells. Curse it all. Damn these spiders, damn the labyrinth, damn the forgotten shore, and especially damn the damned nightmare spell that had brought him here. Sonny suddenly felt tired of this long, feverish, never-ending nightmare he had found himself in. But the worst was still to come. He was the first to notice it. With a dark grimace suddenly appearing on his face, Sonny called out to his companions. Then he led them deeper into the nest, where, attached to the wall, hung a cocoon that was different from all the others. Because this one hid a rough silhouette of a human body. The 6 of them stood somberly around the cocoon, each consumed by their own dark thoughts. Finally, Nephise turned her head to Castor and said, "Can your sword cut it open?" With a short nod, the proud legacy summoned the enchanted giant and took a step forward. Approaching the cocoon, he stopped and hesitated for a few moments. "Be careful." Glancing back at Changing Star, Castor lingered for a second, and then faced the cocoon with grim determination written on his face. As ghostly green light emanated from the blade of his sword, he swung it with the graceful precision of an expert swordsman. The tip of the giant cut through the metal wires of the cocoon, splitting it open. A shriveled human body fell to the floor, making the legacy jump back. Nephise, Castor, and Sonny stared at it, their faces pale and full of ghastly resentment. Then, Sonny bent over and emptied the contents of his stomach. This was just too much. The young man whose corpse they found in this harrowing place did not die an easy death. In fact, being eaten alive from the inside by hundreds of tiny nightmare creatures was probably the worst fate imaginable. At least Sonny couldn't think of anything worse. But even worse still, he recognized the dead sleeper. His face was strangely intact, with an expression of horrifying agony frozen on it forever. Despite the overall condition of the corpse, Sonny knew who it was just from one look. It was the young man who had attended the academy with them, the one who had called him a shorty when Sonny first approached Castor to create the impression that he was a boastful lunatic. Looking at their condition, Effie frowned. "Did you guys know him?" After a few moments of silence, Castor slowly nodded. "Yes, his name was Stephen. He was the youngest heir of the Pandavar clan." Stephen. Sonny had not even bothered to learn the name of this arrogant young man back when they were preparing to venture into the dream realm at the academy. In fact, he had really disliked him, and for good reason. But looking at the hideous, terrifying corpse in front of him, he had forgotten all about it. Sonny would never wish this fate on anyone, let alone one of his fellow students. Slowly, a solemn mood took over the cohort. They had already known that the other 3 sleepers sent to the Forgotten Shore this year never made it to the Dark City, which meant that they had perished somewhere in the labyrinth. However, finding one of them served as a stark reminder of how fragile their own lives were. Who knew what would happen to them in the future? If not today, death could be waiting for them tomorrow. Perhaps years from now, it would be their corpses that someone would stumble upon by accident. Some time later, Nephi's gritted her teeth and turned away. Then she said, her voice suppressed and hollow, "We need to leave. The sun is setting." Her words broke the silence and brought everyone back from their grim reveries. Castor lingered for a few minutes, then spoke in a hesitant tone. Aren't we going to bury him?" Changing Star shook her head. "There's not enough time. I also don't want anyone touching the bodies infected with these eggs. It's too dangerous." The members of the cohort looked at each other. No one had a reasonable objection, but it felt wrong to just leave their fellow human here. Finally, Nephi sighed. A complicated expression appeared on her face, and then she said, "All right, go. I'll catch up with you guys later." Sonny stared at her for a few moments and then slowly turned away. One after another, the 5 of them glanced at Changing Star and left, leaving her alone with the dead young man and numerous cocoons, each hiding a slain nightmare creature. As soon as the last member of the cohort climbed out of the nest, a beam of pure radiance suddenly shot from the dark hole of its entrance, followed by a wave of scorching heat. The purifying fire unleashed by Changing Star engulfed the remains of their fellow student, and then spread to the numerous cocoons, the nightmare creatures inside of them, and even the corpse of the spider matriarch herself. The insides of the nest turned into an incandescent, incinerating furnace. Everything inside of it was doomed to be annihilated and turned to ashes. A few minutes later, the whole structure was consumed by furious white flames. Nephi's had escaped the burning nest shortly after the rest of her cohort, her face pale and tired. Leaving the grandiose funeral pyre behind, they began ascending the statue of the ancient warrior. The night was approaching. Once they climbed all the way to the broad shoulders of the statue and found a suitable place to make camp, everyone looked down without having to say anything. Far below them, the giant nest was still aflame. The cables that constituted it were melting and turning into rivers of liquid metal, flowing down from the edges into the vast abyss of the canyon. The turbulent black waters were rising from below to meet them. When the 2 streams met, one lightless, the other incandescent, billowing columns of hot vapor shot into the air. For a few moments, it seemed as though light and darkness were on equal footing. But then the cursed sea rose from the depths of the canyon in a surge and washed the brightness of melting iron away. The flood of blackness crashed into the burning nest, dousing it. A minute or so later, the white flames were gone. The surface of the dark sea continued to rise as though nothing had ever happened. Sonny sighed and turned to Nephi's. Now that they had reached their goal, it was time to face the real danger. With a grim expression on his face, he asked, "So now what?" He knew the general concept of how she was planning to reach the southern edges of the forgotten shore in a short time, but not the details. Changing Star glanced at him, lingered for a moment, and then said, "We arrived at the canyon faster than I expected. There are still 2 days left before we can act, so make yourself at home. We'll rest tomorrow and start preparing for it the next day." Sunny smiled. Rest, that sounded swell. Plus, he wasn't really looking forward to making use of the fast and comparatively safe method of traveling through the labyrinth that Nephi's had talked about. In fact, he would rather never have to use it at all. Just like that, the cohort found itself with nothing to do for the next 2 days. Before leaving the Dark City, Changing Star had anticipated that various things could slow them down and padded the schedule of the expedition with extra time. Who knew that they would actually make it to the broken bridge so fast? In any case, Sunny wasn't complaining. He had a lot to do and think about. For example, the mysterious connection between his Takai, Effie's spear, and the headless statues that stood around the forgotten shore. The statues represented the 7 valiant heroes that had made an oath to return light to this cursed land thousands of years ago. Sunny had seen 3 of them by now: the knight, the graceful woman, and now this mighty warrior. Did every statue have a connection with a specific memory? If so, what was that connection, and why was Nephi so reluctant to share this information with everyone? Well, it wasn't like he and Changing Star were very close now. Sunny had drawn a clear line to denote the nature of their relationship himself. He insisted that he was not a true member of the cohort, but merely a hired specialist. Why would she share her secret with him? This was a logical conclusion, but Sunny couldn't help but feel a bit resentful. Despite the fact that he was her first partner now, the situation had changed. Nephi's had other people to rely on like Castor. So why would she say that Sunny was the only person she trusted on the forgotten shore except for Cassie, and then hide her technique from Castor? Everything felt so complicated. In any case, there was an invisible line drawn between the core members of the hunting party and the outsiders, Sunny and Kai. No one consciously avoided them, but it was clear that the line existed. When all was said and done, the 4 true members of the cohort preferred each other's company. That's why Sunny and Kai ended up spending a lot of time together, chatting about this and that, and generally having a nice time. Honestly, Sunny couldn't complain. As far as companions went, the charming archer was not the worst option. Plus, their conversations were extremely entertaining. Kai had a lot of fun stories about his life as a celebrity, while Sunny had plenty of macabre anecdotes about his life in the outskirts. Their life experiences were so vastly different that it was almost as if they were from different worlds. As a result, both felt like they were listening to fictional stories about some strange and fantastical land that they had never heard about before. Sunny spent the rest of his time training with the sword, trying to turn shadow dance from an ethereal concept into a practical set of core principles. The progress was painfully slow, but now there was progress at least. He was having so much trouble because his chosen battle style was so strange and elusive. Unlike most styles, which started with certain movements and steps, this one was supposed to imitate any movement and any step instead of introducing its own. So it was more about the state of mind and the flexibility of his physical behavior. Sunny had to create a set of training exercises that would allow his body and muscle memory to become capable of adapting to any style and turn pliable like a shadow. On the first day of trying, his whole body ached. Despite his incredible physical shape and experience with tough training, Sunny ended up straining the muscles that he didn't even know he had, and forced those that he did know about to behave in a way that was utterly different from what they were used to. Actually, his previous training was even detrimental to the whole process. He had to make himself unlearn a lot of things to allow for this strange style to take root in his very bones. Thankfully, the foundation of his technique was changing Star's flowing style, which itself was designed for maximum adaptability. If Sunny learned another style or was further into mastering any existing technique, this would have been 10 times harder, if not impossible. Needless to say, his exercises were in no way similar to the beautiful and graceful dance he had seen in his dream. In fact, from the side, Sunny must have looked as though he was having a seizure. He caught more than one amused stare while practicing. It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that he was slowly pushing himself toward mastering the basics of shadow dance, and hopefully receiving his first relic. On the evening of the first of the 2 days that they had at their disposal, Sunny climbed all the way to the highest point of the statue and sat there alone, looking at the setting sun. He felt as though he had to find a sense of balance that he had lost at some point along the way. Not because he missed it, but because he was going to need that balance to remain firm and steady when the moment of truth came. If he was right about the future, then this was probably the last day of peace he would experience until this whole thing was over. Not only the expedition, but all of it. Looking back, his behavior in these past few months was highly erratic. Where were the cold rationality and ruthlessness that saved him so many times in the past? The caution and devious cunning that allowed him to survive the first nightmare? He had not been acting like himself for a long time. Yes, his mental state had suffered greatly because of everything that had happened. But was it the only reason? Come to think of it, the first blow dealt to him was the bitter revelation that there was no gateway in the bright castle. After everything that Sunny had endured to make it to the dark city, the crushing intensity of their journey through the labyrinth, the diabolical trap of the soul devourer and their escape from it, the cold and harrowing night of traversing the dark sea, all of it turned out to have been for nothing. Not only were they not rewarded for their efforts, but all of their hopes were mercilessly destroyed and obliterated instead. This alone was enough to drive a person mad. Then came the feeling of alienation he felt while living with Nephi's, Cassie, and all the newcomers in the outer settlement. Instead of finding support and solace in the company of his friends, Sunny fell into his old habit. Unconsciously, he turned himself into an outcast to prevent anyone from making him one. This was the most noticeable, but not the only instance of him regressing to his old self. After fighting so hard to change and grow, Sunny ended up abandoning most of the lessons he had learned after becoming infected by the nightmare spell. He was almost like an addict relapsing after a few days of sobriety and giving up completely because of this one small mistake. But who could blame him? Sunny was already shaking under the pressure of the situation. One little push, and he would fall under its weight. In the end, it was not one, but 3 blows that shattered him completely, as though the world wanted to make sure that he was truly broken. First was the terrible epiphany of what Cassie's vision really meant. Almost instantly after that, while Sunny was still reeling, came the fatal mistake in the conversation with Harper and the brutal murder that followed. And if that was not enough, the person he relied on the most to keep his sanity in this cursed place, Nephi's, made it impossible for him to trust her any longer. Anyone would have collapsed under that weight, and yet Sunny managed to keep his balance, even if just barely. The final straw that finally broke him was the excruciating, never-ending sea of torturous pain he suffered after being mortally wounded by the Black Knight. After that, Sunny had relinquished all pretense of having control. And now here he was, playing the fool, acting like a fool and fooling around with Kai and Effie. Wasn't it fun? Wasn't it easy? Yes, his mental state wasn't great. But it was also very convenient to blame everything on this condition. The truth of it. The truth of it was that Sonny did not try to rein himself in at all. In fact, he welcomed this madness. Being a bit crazy was comforting, simple, and safe. It protected him from having to look at the heartbreaking truth and remember it. Sonny needed the shield of madness to save himself from the bottomless despair that threatened to destroy him completely. So what if he was prone to act recklessly in this state? So what if he made mistakes here and there and took unnecessary risks? Anything was better than having to face that despair. Just like Nephis had said, one had to become a little insane to survive in the world that had gone mad. And yet, Sonny knew that what he was doing was nothing but hiding his head in the sand. And now that the end was approaching, he had to stop hiding from the truth. He had to admit and endure it. This was the only way for him to survive. As the sun disappeared behind the horizon and the absolute darkness drowned the forgotten shore, he sighed deeply and whispered, all right, it's time to wake up." The next day, 6 humans were standing at the edge of the vast canyon as the twilight of dusk drowned the world in shadows. Far below them, the black waters of the cursed sea were raging, rising from the depths in a terrifying, obliterating wave. In a few minutes, all light was going to be completely gone. And then, the flood of darkness would wash over the world, destroying anyone left standing in its path. And yet the humans were not rushing to get away. Instead, they just stood there and waited. Looking down into the canyon, Sonny gritted his teeth and shivered. Then, he glanced at Nephis and licked his dry lips. "Are you sure about this?" Changing Star did not spare him a look and simply nodded. Despite the fact that the rising black water was quickly approaching them, her face was calm and composed. A moment later, the last vestiges of sunlight disappeared, leaving them in utter darkness. The silence that surrounded them was broken only by the sound of waves rushing against the walls of the canyon. Getting closer and closer. "Prepare yourselves." Sonny sighed. "Here we go." Suddenly, a blinding burst of white light pierced the darkness. Holding the incandescent sword in her hand, Nephis closed her shining eyes for a second, and then raised the sword high above her head, as if calling the monsters of the depths to come take her. The embrace of impenetrable darkness was broken by the furious white light of Changing Star's incandescent sword. Illuminated by it, 6 people were standing on the shore of a raging river. Their faces were pale and grim. The canyon had disappeared, consumed by the rising surge of the black water. Now, the cursed sea was flowing over its edges, ready to swell and flood the narrow passages of the great labyrinth in an unstoppable wave. Sonny felt cold water wash over his feet and shivered. The rest of the cohort reacted exactly the same. Even Kai, who could escape into the lightless skis at any moment, seemed to be deeply unnerved by the closeness of the encroaching sea. Among the 6 of them, only 3 had truly experienced the perils of this dark abyss. They knew that the real dread came not from the sea itself, but from the terrors that hid in its cursed depths. Like the host of the whispering voices that they had heard beneath the branches of the soul tree, or the gargantuan creature that had almost cost Nephis her life. However, Sonny was not going to make a remark to educate the rest of the cohort. After all, what they were trying to do right now was to summon one of these terrors from below. One that was different from all the others. "Sonny." Peering into the darkness, he lingered. "I don't see anything yet." The water was already to his shins and rising swiftly. Sonny grimaced and struggled with the desire to turn around and run away without looking back. If he was fast enough, if he was lucky enough, he could still make it to the giant statue before the torrent of darkness drowned him under its crushing weight. Instead, Sonny glanced at Nephis and Cassie. The blind girl had glimpsed this secret of the forgotten shore in her visions and shared it with Changing Star. Changing Star had devised a plan to make use of it. Both of them were confident that they were going to succeed, so he was going to be confident too. Sonny didn't fully trust either of his former companions, not anymore, but he trusted their judgment. Just as that thought appeared in his mind, there was a subtle movement at the edges of his vision. Turning his head, Sonny stared into the darkness and trembled. It's here. Out there in the distance, a massive shape was moving through the waves, attracted by the light of changing stars' incandescent blade. The sea seethed and swirled around it, the black mass of water easily pushed away by the approaching creature. Nephi's gritted her teeth and somehow made her flames burn even brighter, forcing the darkness to retreat another dozen steps. Get ready. A few moments later, the furious sounds of a massive body moving through the dark water reached their ears. The creature was a true giant, easily towering above the waves even though it was walking on the bottom of the canyon. Well, no surprise. Full of terror and awe, Sonny watched as the thing they were waiting for came closer. Soon, he could discern the general shape of it. Two hills that rose above water were its shoulders, and right between them, where the head should have been, there was nothing but emptiness. There were 7 headless statues on the forgotten shore, but only 6 marks on the map created by Nephi's, not because she had failed to learn of the 7th one, but because the 7th statue never stayed in one place for too long. And now, that stone colossus was walking through the flooded canyon, his shoulder scraping against one of its walls. The wide chest of the headless giant pushed the water away, creating whirlpools in his wake. Raising one colossal arm, the statue easily destroyed the protruding remnants of the ancient bridge that got in its way. The debris rained into the black waves, disappearing into them without a trace. This was their fast and safe, comparatively, method of traveling to the edges of the forgotten shore. Truly insane, Sonny thought, stunned by the sheer scale of everything that was happening. Come to think of it, it was really ironic. The next day after he had decided to return to some semblance of sanity, something this crazy was about to transpire. It was as though the whole world was mocking him. Shaking his head, Sonny turned to the cohort and yelled, "He's coming!" The black water was already to their knees. The members of the cohort tensed and prepared themselves for what was about to come. They only had one chance to do this. Failure meant death. A few moments later, the massive shape of the stone colossus entered the circle of light created by Nephi's. Its shoulders rose above the waves, close enough to the now invisible shore of the flooded canyon for them to see every tiny crack on the surface of the weathered stone. Not wasting any time, Changing Star ran forward and jumped. A moment later, the blade of her sword hit the surface of the statue and slid deep into it, as if melting the ancient stone. Using the sword as purchase, Nephi started to climb to the giant's shoulder. The other members of the cohort were following closely behind her. Kai was carrying Cassie in his arms, flying to the top of the colossus with no problem at all. Castor seemed to simply disappear and appear a moment later on the giant's shoulder, standing side by side with Changing Star. Only Sonny was having trouble. With him not being very tall and the water level rising with each second, he found it hard to gain enough momentum for a proper jump. Damn, how irritating. However, before he could come up with a solution, Effie simply grabbed him by the collar and tossed Sonny into the air. What? For a few short moments, Sonny was flying. All he could hear was wind whistling in his ears. Then he landed on top of the giant statue, rolled, and barely prevented himself from falling back into the cold embrace of the dark sea. Before he could even stand up, the mighty huntress landed near him and grinned. Such a light. However, before she could finish the phrase, the stone colossus moved, making everyone stumble and fall. Leaving the ruins of the bridge behind, he turned around and indifferently began walking away from it. He was walking south, The stone colossus wandered the forgotten shore aimlessly for thousands of years. Cassie did not know what power had brought him to life, nor what he was searching for in the depths of the dark sea. She had seen a vision of the headless giant passing the ruins of the ancient bridge on a certain day, and then traveling south to the very edges of this desolate land. She also knew that the leader of the cohort that had conquered the bright castle pursued the seventh statue across the labyrinth for a long time before leaving on his doomed journey. His reasons for doing so were, presumably, unknown. Sonny wasn't sure that the blind girl had told him the whole truth about the wandering colossus. In fact, he was certain that there was a deeper layer of secrets surrounding the seven ancient statues and their importance to the riddle of the forgotten shore. However, he was in no hurry to hunt these secrets down. Sonny knew that all three of them, Nephi's, Cassie, and himself, were bound together to this cursed place. The strings of fate were wrapped around them tightly, stretching far into the future, where the final revelations waited. He was going to learn the truth sooner or later. Until then, Sonny was content knowing no more than he needed to know. The stone giant walked across the dark sea, cutting its surface with his wide chest. The 6 humans were gathered on the circular platform of his severed neck, pressing themselves against the swaying stone. The cold water was spraying into their faces, and the furious winds were threatening to throw them off the moving statue into the deadly waves below. Nephi's had long extinguished her flames, so they were surrounded by absolute darkness. Sonny was the only one who could see what was happening around them, so his role was to serve as the eyes of the cohort. Using the strength of the shadow to hold onto the slippery stones, he looked forward with a grim expression on his face. Currently, there was only one thought on his mind. Were they going to make it in time? The colossus was swiftly approaching the other side of the canyon. Sonny could identify it by the remnants of the ancient bridge that were still above the turbulent black waves. However, the water level was rising much faster. Sonny! Looking toward Effie, who called out his name, he lingered for a few moments and then yelled, "Prepare yourself. We're going to be underwater for a couple of minutes at least." A chorus of curses served as the answer. Unseen by anyone, Sonny smiled darkly. This was going to be his second time diving into the dark sea. Wasn't this how Gunlog had begun his journey to the throne of the Dark City? Maybe Sonny would be a king himself one day. And now, the black water rose higher and higher. The shoulders of the giant were already submerged in its lightless depths. The circular platform was going to be next. They were so close to the shore. As the stone colossus moved across the bottom of the canyon, the platform rose and fell. After another fall, it was finally lost beneath the waves. The cold, salty water crashed into them and then swallowed the entire world. The members of the cohort desperately held onto the cracks in the stone, trying to prevent themselves from being washed away by the raging current. No one would be able to save them if they were. Sonny closed his eyes, knowing that he would not be able to see anything through the impenetrable darkness of the cursed sea. Instead, he relied on his shadow sense, hoping that it was going to help him feel if something approached them from the depths. Now, all Sonny had to do was hold tight and hope that the headless giant would reach the shore of the canyon before he ran out of breath. Thankfully, everyone present was strong and powerful. Their physical form was either at the pinnacle of human ability or slightly above it. Several minutes underwater were not going to kill them, most likely. Placating himself with this thought, Sonny waited and waited and waited, struggling against the terrible current with all his strength. At some point, he thought that he sensed an unclear shape swim close to the walking statue, but then the sensation disappeared. Any second now, any second. But the relief he was so desperately waiting for was not coming for far longer than Sonny had expected. Soon, his lungs began to burn, and his muscles began to spasm. Damnation! If he was having trouble, then others must have been in far worse shape. After all, oxygen traveled through human bodies with blood, and their blood had not been altered and comprehensively enhanced by the forbidden legacy of the mysterious weaver. Just as he thought so, Sonny felt one of the 6 shadows slipping from the circular platform. It was Kai. Crap! Fortunately, before the Colossus plunged into the dark depths, the charming archer had been worried about Cassie and tied himself to her with the help of the golden rope. Surprisingly, the blind girl turned out to be more resilient than him in the end. Now, she was holding both of their weights, desperately grabbing onto a narrow crack in the ancient stone. Kai's unconscious body was floating a few meters behind her. He was safe for now. But how long would Cassie herself be able to hold on? When Sonny felt his mind weakening, his body was suddenly slammed into the platform with tremendous force. The stone giant was climbing out of the canyon. His massive hands grabbed onto the edge of it, and with one devastating pull, the Colossus threw himself upward. He cursed. Sonny felt as though he was aboard the worst amusement ride in human history. His bones groaned, being pressed down upon by an invisible weight. A few moments of this torture, and they were above water once again. Desperately grasping for air, Sonny inhaled several times and then weakly looked at the unconscious form of Kai. Crawling toward the archer, he grabbed him and dragged the body back to the rest of the group. Entrusting him to Cassie, Sonny looked down at the dark water below and suddenly growled in a low voice. Turning her head, Nephi's asked with a deep frown on her pale face. "Sonny, what is it?" Looking at the torso of the giant statue, he gritted his teeth and lingered for a few moments before answering. Then, in a voice that was dreadfully grim, Sonny said, "We have a passenger." Colossus rose from beneath the turbulent waves, rivers of black water streaming down his stone body. Now that the walking statue had climbed out of the canyon, the cursed sea was barely up to its abdomen for the moment. Once the dark waters reached higher, the giant would be submerged in them up to his shoulders once again. Sonny had to get rid of the unwelcomed passenger until then. Far below, flattened against the chest of the Colossus, a strange creature had attached itself to the ancient statue. It looked like a cross between a translucent jellyfish and an eel. However, Sonny could see a deformed skeleton of a giant humanoid being trapped within the transparent flesh of the repulsive abomination. He shivered. Compared to the stone giant, the eel looked rather small, however. This was just an illusion. Really, the creature was as large as a train. Its jaws were full of sharp fangs and wide enough to swallow a human whole. Curses! If there was one good thing about the situation, it was that the eel did not seem to be a corrupted nightmare creature, but merely a fallen one. Perhaps it survived in the cursed sea by attaching itself to the true terrors of the depths and feeding off the remains of their prey. As soon as Nephi spoke, Sonny noticed long feelers of the creature tremble and move, as though reacting to the sudden sound. The eel turned its head slightly in their direction. When he answered, the feelers rippled once again, and the monstrosity turned its head once more, this time staring directly at Sonny. Crap! A moment later, translucent tentacles appeared from beneath the abomination's body and shot up, finding cracks in the weathered stone and pulling it toward the neck of the Colossus. Where the cohort was. Changing Star must have felt something, because tiny white sparks suddenly ignited in the depths of her eyes. Sonny put a hand on her shoulder and shook his head. Don't. Stone giant or not, lighting a beacon in the middle of the cursed sea was not the best of ideas. Now that it had escaped the confines of the canyon, the real horrors were out and about. Just like the cohort had discussed before, light was their last resort, something they would summon only if the moment came where there was no other choice but for all of them to fight. And whether Sonny liked it or not, that moment was not upon them yet. With a reluctant scowl, he turned away and said, I'll handle it. The giant eel was his problem to solve. Yeah, that's great and all, but how the spell am I supposed to get rid of this thing? Looking down, Sonny calculated that he had a dozen or so seconds left before it was time to act. The repulsive abomination was slowly crawling toward them, scaling the torso of the giant statue at a disturbingly steady pace. Think. Several seconds later, Sonny approached Effie and kneeled by her side. Taking the huntress by the hand, he put something into her palm and said, "Do you feel the colossus moving up and down? That's his steps. I need you to start counting them. If I'm not back after 30 steps, throw the thing I gave you in that direction as hard as you can." "All right." Effie gave him a nod. Her usual humor was gone, replaced by grim determination. "Good, well, wish me luck." The huntress lingered for a moment and then said, "Good luck." When he was ready to walk away, she suddenly gripped his arm. Sonny stopped and raised an eyebrow. "What?" Effie hesitated before speaking. "Listen, Sonny, if you die, I can have your soul shards, right?" He stared at her for a second, his face twitching. "This wench?" "Absolutely not. If I die, all my shards are to be thrown into the sea. No one is to get anything, understand?" With that, he left the cohort behind and walked to the edge of the swaying stone platform. "Here goes nothing." Jumping down, Sonny slid to the giant's shoulder and caught himself from falling all the way into the raging waves by grabbing onto a crack in the stone. To his right, the shoulder was slowly moving as the colossus swung his hand. To his left, a curved path of stone led all the way across the chest of the statue to its other shoulder. This curving path was, in fact, the collar of the giant's tunic, carved masterfully from stone by the unknown sculptor. Stepping on it, Sonny struggled to keep his balance on the swaying, slippery surface and hurried forward. Soon, he was directly above the climbing eel. The abomination was already close, allowing Sonny to discern every repugnant detail of its translucent, giant body. What the hell? Why does everything have to be so disgusting? A moment later, he sighed. "Let's try this." Summoning the prowling thorn, Sonny gritted his teeth and cut his forearm, smearing some blood on the blade of the kunai. Then, he used all the strength he had in his body to hurl the dagger down. The prowling thorn spun in the air and hit the giant eel right in the place where its eye should have been. Sonny did not notice any visual organs on the creature's body, but on the deformed humanoid skull hiding beneath the flesh, that's where the eye socket was. The kunai wedged itself deep into the monster's head, causing a small fountain of crimson blood to erupt upward. Of course, such a tiny wound was nothing for a creature of this size. For a moment, everything became silent. Then, hundreds of slender tentacles suddenly exploded from the eel's flesh and shot in Sonny's direction in a chaotic, slithering mass of translucent flesh. "Damn it!" Forced to dismiss the prowling thorn to avoid being thrown off the ledge, Sonny lunged forward. A moment later, the tentacles reached his previous position and crashed into the stone, sending shards flying into the air. Sonny kept running, knowing that the tentacles were just a second away from piercing him. The sounds of breaking stone were thundering just behind his back, getting closer and closer with each moment. The prowling thorn appeared in his hand once again. Reaching the end of the path and with nowhere left to run, Sonny cursed and jumped straight into the darkness. The eel tried to catch him, but was a second too late. Grab! Falling toward the dark waves, Sonny threw the kunai in the direction of the stone giant's hand. Instead of a weapon, the colossus was holding a tool that resembled a mason's hammer. The kunai curved in the air and wrapped the invisible string around its shaft. "This is going to hurt." Sonny plunged into the darkness. A moment later, the string drew taut, and he found himself swinging through the air at a terrible speed. Flying underneath the colossal stone fist, he almost touched the black water with his feet, but then the inertia pulled him up and away. After a few seconds of weightlessness, Sonny landed on the hammer's head and let out a shaky breath. Without wasting any time, he dislodged the prowling thorn and pulled it into his hand, then wedged the dagger in a narrow crack on the surface of the giant hammer. Landing on it was one thing. Staying here, though, that was something else entirely. The Colossus was swinging his arms as he walked, so Sonny basically found himself on top of a giant pendulum. Not only was the hammer swaying back and forth, but the angle of the surface he was standing on also constantly changed, making it hard not to fly off or slid into the raging sea. Almost kneeling, Sonny held onto the kunai and tried to keep himself from falling. Then, his face pale and grim, he looked up and glanced at the eel. "I'm right here, you slimy worm." The abomination lingered for a few moments, considering whether it should continue to climb up or follow the sound made by the prey. Finally, it twisted its long, repulsive body and slid over the shoulder of the giant, crawling down his arm. Toward Sonny. "Come on, come on." He was hoping that his blood will have the same effect on the giant eel as it had on the corpse eater. Both were presumably fallen creatures. If one was poisoned to death by blood weave, why couldn't the other? Sonny had not cut himself with the prowling thorn for the fun of it. Sadly, his blood seemed to have no effect on the eel whatsoever. The monster continued to pursue its prey without showing any signs of being poisoned. So, it's not poisonous, really. It just tore that leech from inside because the stupid thing swallowed a whole lot, and the weave imbued my blood with the odd quality of always being attracted back to the larger mass of it. The corpse eater's innards were in the way, so damn it. His hopes of killing the eel were crushed. Now, Sonny was stuck on the swinging hammer, with his only path of escape blocked by the swiftly approaching abomination. Damn it all. Letting go of the kunai, Sonny summoned the midnight shard and slashed at the slender tentacle that approached him. Even enhanced by the shadow, the blade of the takai failed to cut the flesh of the fallen creature, and instead simply batted it away. Not good, not good. The eel had two types of tentacles. Some were thick, powerful, and few in number. These ones were used to push its massive body forward and hold onto the swinging arm of the Colossus. The other tentacles were slender, long, and numerous. These were the ones that Sonny now had to dodge and fight against. The closer the eel got, the more tentacles assaulted Sonny from all sides. Dodging and deflecting them while maintaining his balance on the chaotically swinging hammer was an almost impossible task. Luckily, Sonny had practiced the firm battle style of the Stone Saint and incorporated it into his own technique. Its steadiness and indomitability were translated through grounded footwork, which allowed him to plant himself on the stone surface of the hammer and refuse to be thrown off or moved even by an inch. Between choking breaths, Sonny couldn't help but think that Nephi's was right. The best fighters weren't those who were the strongest, but those who were the most adaptable. The foundational style he had learned from her had served him well on the streets of the Dark City. But if he had continued to follow it narrowly and neglected to add flexibility to his technique by incorporating the Stone Saint style into it, he would be dead by now. The dream realm was wild, unpredictable, and often defied logic. It threw all kinds of horrors at those unfortunate enough to step foot inside its vast expanse. Take this situation. For example, what kind of a person would imagine that, one day, they would have to fight a translucent eel the size of a train atop a walking stone colossus? Sonny certainly never expected to find himself in such a situation. Only a complete lunatic would. That's why adaptability was the most important trait an awakened fighter could possess. But even though Sonny had taken all the right steps, the seconds he had left to live were numbered. The onslaught of the slender tentacles was already too much for him to handle, and they were only growing in number. 28. With an inaudible sigh, Sunny allowed the shadow to slide off his body and rush toward the approaching eel. Instantly weakened, he gritted his teeth and tried to resist the attacking tentacles as best as he could. One of them hit against the blade of the midnight shard with tremendous force, sending it flying from his hand into the darkness of the night. The other hit him across the chest, causing Sunny to yelp in pain and roll back, almost sliding off the surface of the hammer. Catching himself at the last moment, he pushed away and rolled, barely avoiding being pierced through the chest by the third. He had nowhere to retreat anymore. But it was fine. 29. Back at the circular platform, Effie strained her muscles and hurled the thing entrusted to her by Sunny into the air. It was the ordinary rock. Flying away, the memory suddenly screamed. 30 steps. Its loud scream caused the feelers on the eel's head to ripple. The giant creature suddenly turned its head in the direction of the noise, its terrifying maw opening in hunger. For a moment, it paid Sunny no attention. Its weight also shifted, leaning over the abyss of black water. Right then, a human shadow glided right in front of it, and two crimson eyes ignited in its depths. The stone saint stepped out of the shadow, which then instantly wrapped itself around the taciturn monster and filled her with immeasurable power. The shadow's sword flashed. Sunny wasn't trying to kill the eel. Despite all of the stone saint's might, she was too weak to slay something that abominable. He just wanted to sever one of the main tentacles that supported most of the eel's weight. Augmented with the power of shadows, the stone knight easily cut into the flesh of the eel and sliced one of the thickest tentacles apart. Losing its purchase, the repulsive creature shuddered and slid helplessly from the swinging arm of the colossus, falling into the turbulent black waves with a splash. Then it was gone, pulled away by the strong current. Sunny fell to his knees and drew in a deep breath. Then he said in a cold, raspy voice, "This ride ain't free, bastard. Next time, buy a ticket." Sunny remained on the swinging hammer of the colossus for a while, resting and trying to catch his breath. However, very soon, the dark sea rose high enough to make his position perilous. With a deep sigh, he stood up and dislodged the prowling thorn from the stones. Waiting for the colossus to raise his hand, Sunny jumped down. The wind whistled in his ears, and a few moments later, he landed on the wrist of the giant in a roll. As soon as Sunny got back to his feet, the stone surface beneath plummeted down. Thrusting the kunai in another crack, he gritted his teeth and held onto his dear life. Soon, the ground he was standing on sloped down, and then turned into a vertical wall, with nothing but the dark abyss of the cursed sea visible below. Hanging off that wall, Sunny cursed and waited for the colossus to bring his arm back up. When it finally happened, Sunny immediately dashed forward. He had several precious seconds before the pendulum swung again, and had to cover as much distance as possible with each swing of the giant's arm. Too slow, and the cursed sea would catch up to him. The closer he got to the elbow of the walking statue, the more inclined his path was. Eventually, Sunny had to climb instead of run. His hands were tired from fighting and supporting his weight, but he stubbornly continued moving forward and up. Once Sunny reached the elbow and climbed higher, the amplitude of the swinging reduced considerably. Now he just had to scale the vertical wall and reach the shoulder of the giant. Climbing the slippery stone was not easy, but he had gotten used to such tasks a long time ago. In any case, it was way better than that time Sunny had to race against the rising sea during a furious storm, only to get swept away by the black water and be saved by Nephis at the last moment. This time, at least, he didn't need her to save his life. That would be embarrassing. Sometime later, Sunny climbed over the edge of the circular platform, crawled to its center, and sprawled beside the other members of the cohort, who were waiting for his return with tense expressions on their faces. "Sunny, are you all right?" Kai was back to his senses, looking a little bit disheveled but still ridiculously gorgeous. Sunny stared at him in dismay, then sighed. "I'm alive." A short while later, Nephi's called out to him. "What were you fighting?" Sunny grimaced. "A big, ugly worm. I threw him back into the water." With that, he reluctantly sat up and looked at the surface of the dark sea, which was already flowing over the shoulders of the stone giant. Its surface was black and tranquil. No one was pursuing them, it seemed. "It's gone now, so rest up. I'll keep watch." He stayed awake until the break of dawn and then woke the members of the cohort. When they rose to their feet, Sunny lay down on the cold stone and tiredly closed his eyes. Yesterday, he had thought that he would not be able to fall asleep atop the walking stone giant. However, Sunny had underestimated how exhausting this long night would end up being. Even the body of a powerful sleeper needed rest. Actually, the swinging of the stone platform was sort of soothing. Soon, he was fast asleep. When Sunny woke up, the sun was already high in the sky. Yawning, he sat up, summoned the endless spring and greedily drank some water. Someone had left a plate of food near him, so, without thinking too much, Sunny picked it up and had himself a late breakfast. "Ah, that hits the spot." Recognizing the taste of Neff's cooking, he glanced at their intrepid leader and smiled. It was nice to laze around while others were working. While Sunny was sleeping, the stone platform had transformed. Plates of iron stripped off the abominable spiders and stored in Effie's bag were inserted around its perimeter, with the golden rope strung between them as an improvised railing. More of these plates were shaped into makeshift rods and placed in the center to serve as throwing spears, in case the cohort was attacked from the air. Currently, Kai and Effie were building additional battlements on the left shoulder of the giant, while Nephi's observed their progress from above. They were taking no chances. A trip through the labyrinth, no matter how fantastical, was still full of danger. It was better to be safe than sorry. Sunny scoffed. "So much work. What's the words? No, I'm not going to finish that thought. No thanks." On the stone beside him, the shadow applauded sarcastically. Shaking his head, Sunny finished his food in silence and moved to the edge of the platform to look down at the vista of the forgotten shore. Far below, the landscape of the labyrinth was slowly moving past them. The stone giant was marching south, indifferently crushing mountains of crimson coral under his feet with each step. The view was simultaneously hypnotic and depressing. In every direction, as far away as Sunny could see, there was nothing but red coral, with rare heights protruding from it into the gray skis here and there. The forgotten shore was truly vast, and every inch of it was full of unspeakable dangers. Not too far from him, Castor was also busy studying the landscape. However, his interest wasn't purely idle. Changing Star's map was on the stones beside him, and the proud legacy was drawing new marks on it from time to time. Sunny sighed. The cohort might have caught a ride on the shoulder of the stone giant to reach their destination at the edges of the forgotten shore, but they were going to have to walk all the way back to the dark city by themselves. That was months of traveling through this treacherous hellscape, with nothing but their own strength and wit to keep them alive. The information Castor was putting on the map today was going to be priceless to them in the future. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Right now, Sunny deserved a little respite. Turning away from the handsome young man, he lowered his gaze and peered at the sights below. It was not every day that one got an opportunity to enjoy a beautiful view of hell. In the next few hours, Sunny did nothing but leisurely gaze at the vistas of the labyrinth. While monotonous, they were still picturesque and breathtaking. The forgotten shore was a harrowing but beautiful place. The somber gray sky and the black earth created a perfect backdrop for the vibrant crimson sea of twisting coral blades. Here and there, strange landmarks broke the dullness of the landscape, igniting the flames of curiosity in Sunny's heart. After all, he was nothing if not a passionate explorer. Provided, most of his explorations ended with something dying at the end of his blade. But still, out there in the depths of the labyrinth, Sonny saw many things that piqued his interest. The skeletal remains of colossal monsters, with signs of ferocious battles written in the marks on their bones. Broken wrecks of giant vessels, with terrible breaches in their mighty hulls. Abyssal chasms that were full of darkness and emptiness, leading into the depths of this cursed land where true horrors dwelt, and things he couldn't even describe, let alone identify. He even saw several vast ruins that must have been entire cities once. Now, only unclear shapes of magnificent buildings remained, overgrown with crimson coral and barely resembling anything made by a human hand. He didn't know if they had existed before or simultaneously with the Dark City. Regardless, it seemed that no other human settlement on the Forgotten Shore had withstood the curse of darkness as the cursed city had. They were all destroyed and devoured, first by the crimson coral, then by the ruthless flow of time. Now, no one was left to remember that these proud cities had ever existed. The 7 heroes that created the Starlight Legion were described as those born in all-consuming darkness. That suggested that humans had resisted the curse for a while, at least. Maybe the Dark City was built long after the darkness had devoured this land, as the last sanctuary and fortress for those who remained. A lot of good had that done in the end. His reverie was broken by Cassie, who suddenly turned south and frowned. Her quick movement drew everyone's attention. Sonny instantly had a bad feeling. Nephi's turned to the blind girl and frowned. "Cassie, do you feel something?" Cassia lingered for a few moments and then said, her voice uncertain, I think a storm is coming." Sonny looked at the sky, which like always was covered in a gray veil of clouds. Nothing seemed to indicate that there was going to be a tempest turning it impenetrably dark and furious soon. But that was just how things worked on the Forgotten Shore. Storms came out of nowhere and destroyed everyone unfortunate enough to be caught in their murderous embrace. If Cassie said that she felt one approaching, then it was. Their oracle had a good track record of sensing such things. Damn! A storm meant that the cursed sea would rise from the depths earlier than usual. It also meant that there would be rain and lightning, which would make the behavior of the dwellers of the depths unpredictable. It also meant hurricane winds, and that was really bad news when you were stuck on a moving colossus 200 meters above the ground. Nephi's gritted her teeth. You heard her, prepare. However, the blind girl interrupted her. Wait, there is something else. Changing Star lingered for a moment, then asked. You are sensing another threat. Cassie scowled, then said in a strange tone. No, not sensing. I can hear something strange. It's like a rustle. Everyone stared at her for a few seconds, trying to understand the meaning behind her words. Strangely, Kai was the first one to react. Suddenly pale, he spun around and summoned his bow. Before anyone could understand what was happening, something whistled in the air, and a dark shape forcefully crashed into the stone platform, smearing it with blood. A black arrow was protruding from its body. Sonny jumped out of the way and gasped, stunned by the force with which the monster impacted against the stone. It had to have been in a long dive before being pierced by Kai's arrow, mere moments away from snatching one of them away. The creature looked somewhat like a giant locust. Its body was covered in black chitin and comparatively small, no bigger than that of an adult human. Its wide wings were thin and transparent. As it convulsed in death throes, the wings moved, threatening to push the members of the cohort off of the platform. Nephi's dashed forward, grabbed the disgusting creature and threw it down. Kai was already grabbing another arrow. There was an expression of panic on his face. Sonny blinked. Why is he panicking? The monster is already. As though hearing his thoughts, Kai glanced at the members of the cohort with wide eyes and yelled. Swarms, these fiends hunt in swarms. Get ready. Before he could finish, Sunny was already summoning the Midnight Shard and the Stone Saint. Dead. By now, everyone could hear the rustling sound Cassie had told them about. It seemed to be coming from nowhere, surrounding them like a wave. For a few moments, nothing happened. The members of the cohort tensely stared up. Why? Suddenly, a black dot appeared in the gray clouds and swiftly fell down, covering the distance to the neck of the Colossus almost instantly. Before it could attack, though, Effie's spear collided with it. The giant locust practically exploded, sending a rain of blood splattering against the stone back of the Colossus. But by the time the huntress dismissed her spear, and before she had the time to summon it again, there was another dot, and another, and another. Kai shot one more creature out of the air, while Castor used a strange sling he summoned from his soul sea to break the wings of another. Nephi's raised her sword and yelled. Cassie wind. Flinching, the blind girl began to call upon her wooden staff. While white sparks of light were still weaving the shape of it in her hands, the quiet dancer flew out of its scabbard by itself and flashed into the air, piercing an approaching locust clean through. A few moments later, a powerful gale shot from the wooden staff into the skis, slowing the attacking locusts down and sending them staggering. One of these stragglers somehow managed to land on the platform and immediately jumped at Sunny. Changing his stance on the fly, Sunny slashed with his sword, decapitating the repulsive creature. However, because of the inertia, the massive body continued to move forward, slamming into him at great speed. With a curse, Sunny flew back and fell over the railing. Sliding on the stone, he rolled down to the stone giant's shoulder and caught himself on the part of the defensive fence built by Effie and Kai. Then, he stood up and spat a mouthful of blood. A moment later, Sunny froze, his eyes widening. Because of the tumble, he accidentally looked down to the ground. What he saw there made him shiver. Numerous dark shapes were appearing from the labyrinth and jumping at the Colossus, swiftly climbing up his giant stone body. As the members of the cohort killed several giant locusts, their repulsive black bodies fell to the ground, raining blood on the walking Colossus and the crimson coral of the labyrinth. As soon as their corpses hit the ground, it suddenly moved. Dark figures appeared from beneath the mud, rushing at the dead locusts to devour them. Hundreds of monsters were suddenly competing for the few scraps of meat. After several bloody fights broke out and the winners were decided, those who had not gotten to satiate their hunger turned their heads and followed the smell of blood. Right back to the moving stone giant. Looking down with dark resentment, Sunny saw numerous creatures jumping at the legs of the walking statue from the mounds of coral and quickly climbing up. They were headed right to where the cohort was being besieged by the swarm of winged abominations. He couldn't see the shape of them clearly, but there was no doubt that these monsters were bad news. Damnation! Slain an awakened beast, flesh reaver. Your shadow grows stronger. Turning around, Sunny summoned the prowling thorn and hurled it upward. A moment later, using the invisible string as support, he was flying through the air. Grabbing onto the edge of the circular platform, he hoisted himself up and once again faced the carnage. The kunai flashed, cutting the wing of one of the locusts clean off. Suddenly crippled, the creature toppled and plummeted down, no doubt to be devoured by the horde of nightmare creatures approaching from below. The battle with the swarm was not going too great for the cohort. The turbulent winds summoned by Cassie's staff bought them some breathing room by making it hard for the locusts to approach the platform at high speed, but there were just too many of them. Kai was setting one arrow after another loose. After that one first shot, he had not used the blood arrow, choosing instead to rely on his mundane ones. In the chaotic mess of this sudden battle, it was too easy to miss. Plus, he didn't need a lot of power to deliver debilitating wounds to the locusts. They were basically skewering themselves on the arrows themselves by diving from the skis with incredible speed. Still, the abominable reavers were awakened beasts. It wasn't easy for a sleeper to kill one with just a single shot. Just as Sunny grabbed the kunai and spun to avoid a glancing blow from one of the creatures, another one landed on the platform. Two arrows were sticking from its cracked chitin, but the locust was still alive. Not for long, though. Just a moment after the repulsive bug landed, Neff's sword flashed through the air, slicing it in half. Sending the mangled body off the platform with a powerful kick, Changing Star turned to Kai and yelled, "Don't try to kill them, break their wings." With a sudden light of understanding in his eyes, the archer changed his approach. Indeed, that made sense. The members of the cohort didn't need to slay the locusts. They just needed to make it so the flying scourges weren't able to reach the stone platform. Effie, meanwhile, did not need this advice. Everything she hit simply exploded into a disgusting puddle of bloody goo. The problem the huntress faced was that there was no powerful ranged weapon she could use. Her beautiful spear was not really suited to be thrown that often. The memories were created from soul essence. Once a memory was dismissed, that essence returned to the core of the awakened that had summoned it. However, if it was too far away from them, the essence was simply wasted, unless the memory had a special enchantment like that of the blood arrow. The essence wasn't lost forever, as it would slowly accumulate inside the soul core until the peak capacity was reached once again. But this process took time, so one could not endlessly throw their memories at the enemy during a battle, especially not once they reached a rank where managing one's soul essence was of higher importance. Effie had not reached such a rank yet, but she was still limited by that principle. That's why she resorted to using makeshift darts fashioned out of plates of spider iron. There wasn't much of them left, however. Once the last dart was gone, she would have to either exhaust her pool of soul essence or risk fighting the attacking locusts in melee. Just like the Stone Saint was doing right now. As Sunny rushed toward Nephi's, he noticed the shadow lowering her shoulder and raising her shield. In the next moment, one of the repulsive creatures crashed into it at full speed and simply crumbled, black blood exploding into the air through the cracks in the shattered chitin. "You have slain." The huntress, however, did not have the benefit of weighing a literal ton. Despite her graceful appearance, the saint was made out of stone, and stone was much heavier than flesh. It was also much harder to rip and slice apart. Once Effie was forced to fight the locusts with nothing but her spear and shield, her life would be in real danger. Curses, curses, curse it all. Swiftly approaching Changing Star, Sunny kicked a disgusting piece of a killed creature off the platform and yelled, "We have a problem." Nephi sharply looked at him and scowled. "What?" Sunny hesitated for a moment and then gestured down. "There's a couple of hundred labyrinth creatures crawling all over the Colossus. They'll be here pretty soon." Nephi's gritted her teeth, then glanced at the members of the cohort. Cassie was holding the wooden staff, sending powerful bursts of wind into the sky to slow down the attacking swarm. The quiet dancer was flashing through the air, protecting her from the locusts to the best of its ability. Castor was spinning his strange sling, aiming at the wings of the repulsive creatures. His face was calm and grim. Everyone was barely holding on, and one mistake away from death. With a dark look in her cold gray eyes, Nephi's looked at Sunny. Then she said, "Come with me then." Briefly giving Castor a few instructions, Nephi's walked over to the edge of the platform and looked down. When she saw the numerous creatures climbing the stone giant, a grim expression appeared on her face. Sunny weighed the prowling thorn in his hand and asked, "So what's the plan?" Changing Star glanced at him and smiled darkly. "What else? Kill as many as you can." With that, she jumped down and landed softly on the shoulder of the Colossus. With a sigh, Sunny followed. Figures. A moment later, they separated. Nephi's dashed to the opposite side of the moving statue, running on the wide stone path of its collar. She was going to try and deal with those creatures that were climbing the front and the left side of the giant. Sonny was going to have to stop those coming from the right and the back. He wasn't sure that just two of them were going to be enough to cover all that space, but they didn't have a lot of choices. Sonny and Nephi's at least had the high ground advantage against the enemy. Those fighting against the swarm of monstrous locusts, however, did not. The cohort couldn't spare anyone else for this task. Looking down, he was finally able to discern the shape of the attacking labyrinth dwellers. They looked like massive primates covered in dirty, gray fur. Their arms were strong and muscular, easily pulling their heavy bodies up the ancient stone surface. Each had a mouth full of sharp teeth, with two curved tusks protruding from it, as long as daggers. The most disturbing fact about these beasts was that there were crimson flowers growing from within the bloody gaps in their flesh. Some even had pale stems slithering from one eye socket to another. With a shiver, Sonny realized that this tribe of nightmare creatures were simply hosts for a different, much more terrifying one. The primates were nothing but meat puppets for those ghoulish flowers. Oh gods! Summoning the ordinary rock, Sonny wrapped his body in the shadow, strained his muscles, and threw it down as hard as he could. The small rock plunged through the air and collided with one of the creatures far below, hitting it right in the forehead and splitting its rotten skull apart. Not paying any attention to the fact that half of its head was missing, the primate continued climbing up. Sonny gritted his teeth and dismissed the rock. Just as I thought. Nothing could ever be simple on the Forgotten Shore. The cohort would never be just attacked by a swarm of flying abominations. There had to be a horde of monstrous primates attacking them from the ground, too. And gods forbid those powerful beasts were not parasitized by even more ghastly horrors. At least their bodies are not so tough due to their partially decomposed state. That was something he could work with. Just as the first primate climbed into the range of the prowling thorn, something thundered above Sonny, and in the next moment, he was doused from head to toe in fetid black blood. A mangled corpse of a giant locust flew past him and fell down. Sonny frozen for a second, then growled. I'm a walking target now, aren't I? Well, great, let them come, the more the merrier. Extending the invisible string to its maximum length, Sonny aimed and hurled the kunai down. He guided it by ever so slightly pulling on the string. The dagger flashed through the air and spun, drawing a curved path. A few moments later, it cut across the wrist of one of the menacing primates, cleanly severing its hand. Suddenly losing purchase, the beast instantly fell down. After plummeting from the deadly height, it hit the crimson corals below and practically exploded into bloody chunks. Sonny listened to the emptiness, a tense expression on his face. You have slain an awakened monster, Blood Flower. Your shadow grows stronger. A relieved expression appeared on his face. At least these things weren't indestructible. Raising a hand, he caught the returning kunai and instantly threw it again. There wasn't much time left. Countless beasts were climbing up the stone body of the ancient colossus, covering a frightening amount of distance with each second. He had to slaughter as many of them as he could before they reached the battlement constructed on the giant's shoulder, or else they were going to rip him apart. In the next few minutes, Sonny did nothing but control the prowling thorn as it flew through the air, cutting through flesh and bone alike. The heavy kunai never stayed in his hand for more than a second, reaping a bountiful harvest of lives. More than a dozen beasts, those who were ahead of the approaching horde, were thrown off the statue and fell to their deaths, rewarding Sonny with an enviable amount of shadow fragments. However, he was still too slow. Sonny had to be both swift and precise when throwing the dagger, lest he wanted to be pulled off the giant's swaying shoulder himself. What's worse, he had to constantly pay attention to the sky and dodge the attacking locusts when they dove from above to devour him. The horde of terrible beasts was getting closer and closer, their arrival as inevitable as it would be fatal. The situation got even worse when another group of them reached the gargantuan statue's back. Now, Sonny not only had to deal with the monsters climbing its side, but also rush from his perch on the shoulder of the steadily moving colossus to the treacherous path of his collar to prevent the fastest climbers from reaching too high. Bad, bad, this is bad. Covered in blood and with his muscles burning, Sonny continued to slaughter the ghastly beasts as fast as he could. But he wasn't fast enough. At some point, Sonny realized that the climbing monstrosities were now mere meters away from him. He could see every disturbing detail of their rotting bodies, with strangely graceful flowers growing from the bloody gaps. Their crimson petals trembled as they smelled prey. Suddenly, one of the primates strained its powerful legs and jumped into the air, instantly covering the remaining distance to Sonny's position. Before it could land, however, the midnight shard slashed the creature across its massive body, cutting it apart. What flowed out of the terrible wound, however, was not blood, but a vast cloud of red pollen. Before Sonny could register the fact, he had already breathed in a whole lungful of it. His eyes widened. Oh no. This is not good. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.